Hello, my name is J.R. Tolman, and today I'll be taking you through how to automatically email multiple invoice recipients in NetSuite. NetSuite, by default, limits the automatic emailing of invoices to only a single recipient on the customer record. Now, I know there's a lot of different ways to accomplish this, but this is a simple way to utilize a workflow to do this. The first thing we'll need to do is to create a new entity field for when we have multiple email recipients on a customer record. We'll go to Customization, List Records and Fields, Entity Fields, and click on New. From here, we need to give this a label, which I'll call Additional Email Recipients. I will then give this an ID, which will become handy when we get to the workflow portion later on in this video. The type of this field is going to be freeform text, and I'm going to apply this to the customer record. I am then going to go to the Display subtab here and make sure that the subtab field is set to Main, as I want this field right below the native email field for a single recipient. It's also a good idea to put in some help here in case users are wondering what this additional field is used for. All right, once I have this custom entity field set up, I will then go and click on Save. And I have successfully created the additional email recipients field. The next step we'll do is to make sure that we customize the customer form, as I want this additional email recipients field right below the native email field for when a single email recipient is used. I can go ahead and go to List Relationships, Customers, and New. And what you'll see is that new field that I just created for the additional email recipients is now down below in the main section, but it's a little off from where I want it to be underneath the email field that is native. So what I'm going to do here is up in the top right hand corner, I'm going to click on Customize and Customize Form. I will then click on the Fields subtab here. I'm going to go all the way to the bottom, and I'm going to find that field that I just created for additional email recipients. And I'm going to put this in the email, phone, and address field grouping. Yours may be different, but I'm going to go ahead and set this as the default. And that will move this out right above here, where I can then drag and drop this right below the native email field. I'm then going to go ahead and save this form. And now that the form is successfully saved, let me go ahead and create a new customer and show you how the customer record should be populated. So I'm going to go back to List, Relationships, Customers, and New. And I'll go ahead and put this as a company name called Test JR Company. The native email will be shown here, where you will want to populate a single email from the customer. This can be the primary contact email or the actual customer AR account. For this particular setup, I'm going to go ahead and put my email address, which is tolmanj@outlook.com. And then underneath the additional email recipients field, that is our additional email recipients field that we just created, where I can put additional recipients. Now on this, I can go ahead and put as many email addresses as I would like, up to a specific character limit. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and populate this for testing purposes, and I'll go ahead and call this tolmanj@testco1.com. And then it is very important, if you're going to utilize this approach, to make sure that the additional recipients beyond just a single one is set with a comma, and then you're going to put the next email address. So right now I have two additional email recipients in addition to the native one, and I have separated that out with a comma with no space. I will set any of the other additional required fields and click on Save. Now once this has been saved, you can see my email address is the main one, and then my additional email recipients, which is the field that we just created, is set with my additional email addresses. Now, before we get to the workflow that will automatically send to these email addresses upon invoice creation, I'm going to go and create a dummy employee that will be used as the sender of the invoice. So with that said, this does not need an access. It just needs to be set up in the system as a dummy employee. I'm going to go ahead and go to List, Employees, Employees, and New. And I will call this employee that we're going to go ahead and set up called AR JR Co. Now the email address is important here as this will be the sender, which it will come from. It will use this name, and I'll call this ar@jrtest.com. Again, you can use whatever you want for the email address. This is going to be the sender, but it is important to set up a dummy employee. Otherwise, you will need to select a employee that already exists in the sender, which may be the case. But if you are using a generic AR account for your AR invoices, I would recommend setting up that dummy employee. And once the employee has been saved and set up, the last thing we're going to do before we get to the workflow creation is to set up an email template that will be used when we actually send out the invoice. Now, the sender will be this employee that you can see on the screen, and then the email template, which is a great benefit of this solution, is we can customize it to our liking, and it will not be a generic email like native NetSuite likes to do out of the box. To do this, what we're going to do is go up to Documents, Templates, Email Templates, and click on New. Now on this template, I'm going to go ahead and give this a name. I'm going to call this Invoice Email Template. And then what we're going to be focusing on here is going to be the subject and the body of the email that goes out with our invoices. Now the subject, you can put whatever you would like. In this example that I'm going to be setting up, I'm going to go ahead and call this JR Test Co. And then what will be really nice with this, in the subject, I'm going to go ahead and put the invoice number in the subject itself, which cannot be done with the native NetSuite out-of-the-box invoices that go out. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and use a special syntax here, and I'm going to put a $, and then I'm going to put a bracket, and I'm going to call this transaction.tranID, and then a bracket again. Now what this will do is when this goes out, it will be called JR Tesco space pipe space and then the invoice number. Again, this is pulling from the transaction itself. You could put additional information in the subject as is necessary, or you can just put your text up there. Then in the body, what I'm going to do is I'm going to populate the body here with a very generic, but I'm going to use that syntax to pull from the invoice record, which will make it a little bit more personable. So I'm going to put this hello, and then I'll go ahead and put $ bracket transaction dot entity bracket again. Please see the attached invoice for, put a $ transaction dot total here, which will show the total amount of the invoice that's going out, due on, and then I'll put the due date from the transaction with the same approach here. All right, so this is how this is set up, and it will pull from the transaction with the transaction ID in the subject, and it will be a little bit personable with the hello, with the customer's name, the total due, and the due date, and then you can go ahead and save as necessary. So now we're ready to create the workflow, and to create a workflow, this will be a simple workflow we're creating. We're going to go to customization at the top here, workflow, workflows, and new. I'm going to give this a name, and we'll just call it invoice emails. The record type here is going to be transaction, since we're working with invoice transactions. You could do this for any type of transaction in the system, but I'm just going to apply it to our invoices. And the release status, you're going to want to make sure if you are testing this out, put to testing. If you are releasing this in production, go ahead and set it to be released. Do note that all these emails that go out in Sandbox, if you're working in a Sandbox environment, will get redirected back to the logged in user. So even if this is set to be released and users are testing, no harm. These will not go out to the actual users unless you are in production. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to be released. And then down below here, I only want this workflow to send on creation. This is a very simple workflow that will automatically send once an invoice is created. You can get more advanced as necessary for any updates, etc. if you want, but again, this is going to only be on creation. All right, so very straightforward to set up the workflow, and then I'll go ahead and click on Save here. And once it's saved, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this state 1 here. Once I click on the state 1 here, we're going to create a new action, and the new action is going to be what we want to send out the invoices to our customers. So if I go and click on the new action here, it will show me a variety of different types for this workflow. And the specific type that I want is to send an email. We want to send the email once the invoice has been created. So I can go and click on send email. And the first thing what we're going to want to do, a lot of these fields are not going to be necessary to change. Again, for our purpose here, you can get a little bit more advanced if you want. But the first one is going to be the trigger on. We want to make sure that we trigger this workflow and to send the invoices out once the invoice has been submitted, right? So after the record has been submitted, we're going to go ahead and set that. That will be key. And then we're going to move down here and we're going to set the specific sender to that employee that we just set up, right? We set up that dummy employee, which was the AR account, and we'll select them from the dropdown. Right. Again, you could get a little bit more advanced if you want to set a specific sender from a specific field, or it will be a list of employees in the system, which is more commonly used. The next area is very key here, and it's going to be the recipient. Now, again, native NetSuite out of the box will automatically send to one email recipient using that email field. And what we're going to do is, it says from field here. Now, the record type that we're going to be using is the customer, right? So I'm going to go ahead and select the customer, and we're going to pull from the normal email field as the recipient, right? So if we have one recipient, this will select that recipient and populate it. So we are going to want to make sure that this says customer and the field is email. Now the key with this workflow is going to be the CC. So if we do have additional email recipients that have been set on that customer, we're going to want to make sure that the CC field is set. And this CC field can be a freeform text. If you want to go ahead and CC or BCC additional users, feel free to set that. But in this specific use case, what we're going to do is we're going to set the CC field to be the ID of the original field that we created in step 1. So if you recall, that ID that we set in step 1 was cust entity underscore add underscore email underscore recipients. Now again, you're going to want to use the ID that you set up. This is the one that I used in step 1 as part of this setup. And you're going to want to make sure this is in brackets. Now, if it's not in brackets or if it's not set up appropriately, you're going to go ahead and get errors when you're testing this or deploy to production. So it is very important that you make sure that the CC is set up appropriately with that field from the step 1. Now there is one additional thing that we're going to want to add here, as we are using this as a transaction. So if I just set up this, it's going to also fail. Now what I need to do is right before the cust entity, I'm going to go ahead and add in entity dot. What this will do is we'll look at the customer from the transaction, and then it will pull in that field that we created from step 1. So your field should say entity dot cust entity, and then whatever the ID is. Again, mine was add an email recipients with the underscore. Then on the right-hand side, we're going to go ahead and select the content. So I'm going to say use template. I want to go ahead and use my template, which you can certainly update as necessary. And I'm going to go ahead and select the invoice email template that I used before. And then down below is the attachment. And of course, I want to include the PDF of the invoice that goes out. So we're going to go ahead and select include transaction, which is the PDF. Now, what's nice about the workflow, you can be more advanced if you want. You can associate additional attachments as necessary, but this will simply email out the invoice with the customized email template, attach the PDF, and send to multiple email recipients. The last thing I'm going to do with this workflow is to make sure that there is a condition that says there needs to be additional email recipients for this workflow to run. So at the top here, there's this condition. So I'm going to go ahead and expand this or open this. And on this, once I open or expand, I'm going to go ahead and select the record is customer. And I'm going to say the field additional email recipients, the one that we created before, is not empty, right? So customer is the record, the field is additional email recipients, and then the compared type is not empty. Go ahead and add that and click on save. What this will do is once the workflow is running, it will look at the customer record, make sure that the additional email recipients field that we created before is not empty, right? So it has some values in it. And if there's some values in it, once this is saved, it will send out and it will populate the additional email recipients in the CC and it will send out to the normal email field. I will then go ahead and save this workflow action. And the last thing before we do any testing with this is I'm going to go ahead and open this back up, this state. So if you can just click on the hot link here with that send email. And I'm going to make a copy of this. So in the case or the use case where there is not additional email recipients, I want to do the opposite of this or the inverse to make sure that the customer is getting sent with the single recipient. So I'm going to go and make a copy here. And from that, I'm going to go and open the condition that was copied. And I'm going to say the customer additional recipients is empty. So let's say there is no additional email recipients. So we'll say is empty. And if it's empty, we are only going to send it to the main email address. So I'm going to remove my field that I set down here in the CC to make sure it only sends to the single recipient. All right, so this is key that we have that condition on there. There's two states here. Otherwise, NetSuite will error out. If it's only a single recipient, we have the additional email recipients field there. NetSuite would say, well, hey, listen, the field syntax is incorrect, and it would error out. So now that we have these simple two workflows states, what we do is we can test this out with the test customer that I originally created. So I'm going to go and create a new invoice here. Underneath transactions, sales, create invoice. And I will fill out the invoice as you normally would do in NetSuite using my test customer. Now that the invoice has been filled out, before I save this, I want to point out that underneath the communication, I will not be using the native email that goes out of NetSuite. So I will not be using this to be emailed checkbox. This will send out a generic email. It will take only the single recipient from the customer record. Additionally, I can't customize the message. I know this says select message and customer message here. Again, it's not useful as far as what we're doing here with the email template that we set up and the workflow. So disregard anything in the communication here until we save. Once we save, you'll see the actual email that goes out with the additional email recipients. I will then go ahead and save this. If the workflow worked, what you will see then is this will send back to yourself if you're in Sandbox, and you can validate that the email looks correct, the subject and the body. And in the actual subject, you will actually see who it would be directed to. Now, in this case, once I save, I should also see the communication in the emails underneath that communication subtab. So we'll let this save. All right, once saved, I can go underneath the communications subtab, and to validate, you can see down below here, this is looking excellent. The author is that dummy account that we created. The primary recipient is that main email address, again, using native NetSuite. The subject is JR Test Co. space pipe space, and then the invoice number, right? It automatically took the invoice number. Now, if I want to view the details of this, I'm going to go ahead and open this email. And when I open this email, you can see the email message that would go out, right? I have the subject, and then I have the message, hello, the actual company name that I set up. Please see the attached invoice for the amount due on. Now, there's no due date on the invoice that I created, so it's left blank on purpose here. Obviously, I would want to make sure that the due date is set on the invoice. So this is nice that it's a little bit more personable, right? A little more personalized in the email message that goes out. And then the key as part of this particular setup, if I go to the recipients, you can see that it actually sent out to everyone that I had on that original customer. So not only sent to the recipient, but it also will now CC those additional email recipients, again, on the customer record. So a lot of benefits with this, right? It will come from the appropriate AR account that I want. I can get additional email recipients. I can customize the actual body of the email and the subject of the email that goes out. And then It will also attach the PDF or additional PDFs that you saw in the workflow if we want to get a little bit more customizable on that workflow as necessary. You can test this out with a single recipient. It should work the exact same way. Feel free to make this a little bit more personalized if you would like within the workflow itself. Maybe you want to have a review process, have a checkbox to review off the invoices. Once that's checked, it would then send. Again, this is sending directly once the invoice has been created. This concludes on how to set up a simple workflow to automatically send out invoices to multiple email recipients. Feel free to comment or reach out directly to me if you have any questions or need assistance with anything NetSuite related. Happy to assist. Thank you.